Everyone, welcome to the future of education. Okay, well, maybe we aren't quite to the future of education yet, but thanks for joining us for today's webinar, where we're going to be talking about some of the legislative action and support states can and are using to move our education system towards a student-centered approach to learning. My name's Emily Brixey, and I'm a senior manager at KnowledgeWorks, where I spend a lot of time reading and writing about statute and regulation that support student-centered approaches to education. In partnership with Education Commission of the States and New Classrooms, we've put together a fantastic group of panelists to share a little bit about what to expect and how states are approaching the 2024 legislative session. 2024 is slated to be another interesting year in the education policy space. Schools and districts have largely been able to return to their pre-pandemic methods of education, though some states have maintained the flexibilities created during pandemic years. The time of abundant federal stimulus dollars is coming to a close, and I think it's safe to say that we're all pretty eager to see what comes next, like what is the future of education? And while I left my very reliable crystal ball at the KnowledgeWorks office in Cincinnati the last time I was there, I was able to get a group of expert panelists to join us today to share a little bit about what to expect this next year. And without giving away too many spoilers, I will say that the student-centered future of education is looking bright. This webinar is going to consist of two sections of content. First, we'll hear from some state panelists who will share their unique perspectives on what their state is doing to support student-centered learning efforts. Then we'll hear from our partner organizations who work directly with states across the country to support learners and educators as they explore and deepen student-centered learning practices and the policies that support these practices. But I think that's enough hype about this webinar, and let's go ahead and start getting into the content. So moderating today's discussion is Beth Hawkins. Beth is the senior writer and national correspondent at the 74. She's covered education since 2000, and her stories have appeared across numerous publications, including Mother Jones, The Atlantic, Education Next, and U.S. News and World Report. Beth, thank you so much for joining us today. And with that, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, and thank you to the participants who are joining us. And I'm going to echo everything Emily said about this being a fantastic panel. I can't wait to hear the answers, and I'm going to be taking notes because I know there's some fantastic story ideas in here. We are going to hear from Julie Mergel, who is the Chief Program Officer for the Montana Office of Public Instruction, where, among other things, she helps lead school improvement efforts. We're going to hear from Dr. Lucy Payne, who's an associate professor of teacher education at the University of St. Thomas here in my home community of Minneapolis and St. Paul. She's a member of the Matamidi School Board and Minnesota's Teacher Licensing Agency. Stephanie Distasio is the Director of College and Career Readiness at the South Carolina Department of Education, and all three of them are working on things that are going to make the upcoming legislative session fascinating and hopefully productive. And we're going to start with some questions to just kind of set the stage on this. So I think perhaps, Julie, we could start with you. What key trends or shifts do you see in the education landscape that might impact state legislation? And once we've heard your answer, let's go to Dr. Payne and then to Stephanie.
Thanks, Beth. So lots of key trends and shifts have been happening in education. And particularly, we've been very focused on the idea of unfinished learning. But that's not something new. The way that we've had grade level systems have always been set up in ways where it's been difficult for teachers to address their unique student needs. But the conversation is really changing and across both the state education agencies and our legislators, where they have a crucial role to really be looking at building competency-based system to better meet the needs of students and to address things such as learning, unfinished learning. And a large part of that puzzle has been across our states is looking at the assessment and accountability systems that we have and recognizing that one test at the end of the year is not enough and not very helpful for us with our learners and our educators and our families to really be meeting the needs of all of our students and their learning in real time. And so we now are in a year where we're looking at really piloting assessment systems that take a look at not only accountability measures, but instructional utility. So we're going to keep working to really inform our legislators on what are the key elements that are needed to really be able to move towards ultimately a personalized, proficiency-based system for our students to really be meeting all of the individual needs. And by really relating some of those pieces about assessment and accountability, creating policies and funding that will really drive that, so we can get to other kinds of models in innovation, maybe math innovation zones, or all of those pieces that come about when you have tools at your hands, such as assessment, that just are not one-time components that really are strictly for accountability purposes only. So if we have better tools, better ways, we can really start to address some of that unfinished learning and bring real-time data to our teachers and our families and our students that really help them understand where they're at and personalize their own path.
Lucy Payne, what does this look like in Minnesota?
So I will percent agree with the previous speaker. Everything around student achievement is a big issue. Continued COVID academic recovery, looking at student assessments, looking at NAEP data, all those pieces are important and lead us into thinking about personalized learning. There are a number of other things in Minnesota that are impacting our work as well as we look at that educational landscape. One is the teacher shortage. So I sit in a place where we do teacher preparation, where I'm licensing teachers on the licensing board, and teacher retention, increasing teachers of color and Indigenous teachers, teachers' salary, support for teachers. Those are all very important issues that personalized student-centered learning can help support. Another area I'm working quite a bit in that is a huge impact or trend in education right now is the mental wellness of our students and our staff, right? Mental wellness of students often has to do with us not responding to their individual needs. And we can do that through personalized student-centered competency-based learning. I'm also thinking a lot about the trends we're seeing right now in technology in schools around artificial intelligence, one-to-one devices for students. What does that mean? What does that look like? The role of social media. All those things are important. Also in our state, we're at a really prime place to really have some good deep discussions around personalized learning. So very excited for some of the trends we're seeing and some of the solutions that can happen with a personalized perspective for our students.
Stephanie Distasio?
Yeah, so I will agree with both Julie and with Dr. Payne on a number of those. So I won't go over all of them, but I will say some of the trends that we're seeing are really similar. Where we find ourselves is after having the COVID years and learning all the things we learned and our journey, what we are seeing as a trend in South Carolina, and I would say nationwide probably, is a focus and a turn legislatively also to begin thinking about that community involvement piece, that transparency, and really making sure that our students have access to that whole child education and the ability to have multiple pathways that really align with our workforce readiness. And so we're seeing all of those things come together. So as we think about their mental well-being, as we think about the needs of our state, as we look at the impact of where students are academically, how are we taking all of those things, bringing them together and realizing that it is going to take all of us and a real community-based solution to actually move this forward. And so as we look over what we see coming up in our legislative session, we see those things starting to merge and to complement one another and to come together so that we are seeing not just K-12, but really that extension into how do we realize the recommendations of our teacher recruitment and retention task force recommendations that we had. How do we deliver on those? How do we, again, with our workforce readiness, we see some legislation coming around rethinking and revisiting our policies around things like our dual our dual enrollment, our dual credit, working with those institutions of higher education, our technical schools, and also thinking about pathways to enter the teaching profession. And so all of those things, both within K-12 education, outside K-12 education, and thinking about it from the larger lens. And then the last thing I would say is very similar. We are hearing lots and lots, as I'm sure you are, around artificial intelligence, while also balancing the need for thinking about student well-being and what the impact of social media and that phone-based childhood may have for long-term effects. So how do we as a K-12 system begin to think about that just right balance of designing and embracing technology and artificial intelligence while also maintaining a focus on a play-based childhood so that we have really well-rounded and prepared citizens?
So Stephanie, that is a nice tidy segue to our second question, which I'll just let you keep rolling with, which is what are your top legislative priorities for 2024?
Yeah, so I started touching on a couple of those for sure, but we do have a competency-based education proviso. It passed last year, so we currently have that. We have some districts who are piloting that now, and we are really excited to be able to work with our legislature to talk about what that looks like going forward and how we continue to expand that so that more districts can begin to make those shifts to a student-centered, a more and more student-centered approach so that they are personalizing and moving to implement the competencies for the profile of the South Carolina graduate. Along with that, we are really thrilled about some work we have happening and with our high intensity tutoring statewide. I know there are a number of states engaged in that as well. We see that as an opportunity and a complement to this student-centered shift as we are thinking about what each child needs and we're designing those pathways for students. We want to have all of those tools at our disposal. And so having the ability to bring more of that to bear is fantastic. And then the last thing I will say is we are also seeing a lot of move into as I mentioned, the community-based piece, as we're thinking about the open enrollment and the access to different types of programs and curriculum across the state.
Fantastic. Julie, do you want to take it from here?
Yes, absolutely, Beth. So in Montana, we're currently working on implementing an assessment pilot. And so we also been granted one of the largest waivers that the Department of Education's ever given for accountability and assessment as part of this initiative. But what's really critical is rather than having a big test at the end of the year, students are taking small quizzes throughout the year. And the most powerful piece is teachers get to determine at what point they assess what standard in relation to what they're teaching in real time. And so they are taking those assessments, getting those results within days, so that can help really inform their instruction. So these assessments start to have more instructional utility. And that's important because as we look at legislation that's come out of the state of Montana to move more towards competency-based model, which they've also provided legislative funding to districts for transformational advanced opportunities to start to personalize and create more of a competency-based model, we're now going to have an assessment system in the state of Montana where we are actually assessing those competencies when we're teaching them rather at the end of the year. We're not quite there yet, right, to that level of personalization that the students taking the test when they're ready to demonstrate it, but we're on the step towards that. And so we hope to really continue that work here in our state as we're thinking about real-time data and how that's informing our system towards a proficiency-based system. Because in Montana, they've really started to move away from seat time and that idea of just credit bearing, but what does it really mean for competency-based?
Lucy Payne, you represent several organizations, so I imagine your answer is a little more complicated. But what is on your legislative agenda this year?
So you would think my agenda would be more complicated, but I've learned over the years, complication doesn't get us very far. So I'm trying to stay simple and focused and get some work done at the Capitol this year. And when I think of the question, Beth, I think about when you say top legislative priorities for the year, there are things I want to try and get past legislative language that has already been drafted in collaboration with Association of Metropolitan School Districts around redefining that instructional hour or seat time, and defining personalized competency-based education in our state, and offering some planning competency-based education grants, expansion money in that space. So that's what I hope to accomplish bill-wise at the Capitol. But this year is also about laying the foundation for future work at the Capitol that needs to be done. We've been partnered with KnowledgeWorks to do an opportunity analysis and look at our state of what could we do, where are the best places to enter into the systems to make the change that we need for schools to be more student-centered, personalized on behalf of our students. And so when we look at that, we're looking at 3 big areas that we're focusing on. And one is building a culture of innovation, thinking about supports for educators and leaders, and then thinking about our K-12 assessment system. So I'm learning so much from my colleagues today on what their states are doing that'll help us in Minnesota in those spaces. And we'll be reaching out to my co-presenters here later today to hear more about their work.
That's terrific. Stephanie, let's turn back to you, and let's turn to some state-specific questions and hope to circle back to the more general ones. Identifying existing flexibilities within policy can be a great place for states to start looking to transition to personalized and competency-based learning. Can you tell us a little bit about South Carolina's flexibility guide and innovation playbook, pardon me? How did those things come to be, and what have you learned from developing them?
Yeah, so I will give you my short version of how those things came to be. So the flexibility guide came to be because, quite honestly, as I came to the Department of Education from a district, I learned some things that I didn't know existed that we had in available existing flexibility. And I thought, wow, I really could have used that information when I was in a district. And then I learned, as we began to work and try to get districts to take advantage of some existing flexibility, we realized that one of the barriers was a lot of this flexibility lives in lots of places: statute, regulation, you have to do this, that, and the other. And so what the flexibility guide aimed to do was to identify and pull together all of our existing flexibility within the state of South Carolina and talk about what we actually have already and what you could do with it. What does it mean? Where does it live? And we made sure that it was hyperlinked so people could see the source documents and be able to make those connections for themselves. So that was fantastic. When we did that, though, we thought that would be very helpful, and it was. We then followed that with a listening tour with our districts and said, hey, look what we've created. And we put it in their hands, and then we asked for their help. Hey, what do you like about this? What other things could we create? And we heard loud and clear that they loved it. They loved knowing about the flexibility, but they needed more concrete examples of how to leverage it. And so that playbook came from those listening tours. And what we did was we did tons of interviews, both within the state of South Carolina, and we also pulled stories nationally from lots of our friends across the nation, and just gave examples of, if you wanted to do this, like is being done here, one, we gave you contact information for folks who are doing that work. And then we said, if you wanted to do something similar in South Carolina, what would you have to leverage to do that? And what could that look like? And then in many cases, we also said, and what if you even wanted to go further? Because sometimes those things were in their infancy or they were just getting off the ground. We wanted to highlight and celebrate those, but we also wanted to say, what would this look like if you took this all the way to a full competency-based model? And so it really is a way to help us dream and have mental models for what might be in South Carolina.
And I'm wondering if you, as folks are seeing those concrete examples and applying for the flexibility and those opportunities, if you're collecting proof points that are going to inform your legislative work.
Absolutely. As we have had more schools and districts come to us to ask for exemptions through our existing flexibilities, our state board members are saying things like, we've gotten a couple of these. This sounds like a great idea. let's make sure we're capturing this, because at some point we do think and I think this is where you're heading. If we have enough districts asking for an exemption for something, we might want to revisit what that existing regulation or statute is. And so it will definitely help close that circle. And again, it's giving us good information about as we help districts through that process, we're learning as well as they are what resources and tools we need to develop to help them as they make these shifts to their systems, whether those be local or whether they need to be state shifts. So some things are ours that we need to change and we need to improve. And sometimes what our partners at the local districts are learning is, oh, well, this is actually a local policy that we have the power to change, and we don't even need to change anything at the state. And so that's always a great aha to have as well.
That's fantastic. You can show up at the State House with the why and the how simultaneously. Let's go to Lucy Payne. And can we hear from you, Lucy, on how student voice and student involvement are informing your work? How are you tapping students and what are you hearing from them?
So student voice is an interesting space for me. It's one of the most important voices in education. They're the users of our system, right? And they have a lot to tell us. And we've done good work historically in this space. As a school board member, we have a student representative at the table who's sharing her perspective with us. So we have those opportunities. We can see oftentimes at the building level where students are sharing their voice and their ideas with administrators and teachers on how to change and fix the system in small ways. What's interesting, I think, in Minnesota right now is we have multiple groups of students organizing themselves and creating their own nonprofit groups that are truly about their voice being heard and being part of the conversation. So we have a group called Bridge Makers, we have Good Trouble, we have People for PSEO, and we have some other groups that aren't as clearly named and defined, but People for PSEO have done a great job. It's a group of young people led by young people, really focused on disseminating information to high school students and families about PSEO, an option for a personalized perspective for students in our state. Bridge Makers, another youth-oriented group, youth leaders coming together, creating their own organizations. They're working very hard to elevate youth voice to drive middle school redesign. They held a solution summit, invited key stakeholders across our state, is making really good progress in communicating and empowering youth voice. Finally, Good Trouble, another organization in our state I'm working very closely with. They've been awarded a grant from a nonprofit to really look at what is being labeled the new technology of learning, which is student-centered way of learning and trying to expand that. And their goal is to advance public support and expand youth voice within that. But these are examples in our state where youth have gone the next step to say, we're not going to wait to be invited to the table. We're going to set the table. We're going to put the information out there. We're going to put the people in the room together. They're not waiting for us as adults anymore. They're moving forward, which I'm very proud of the youth in our state for doing this work.
So when you say technology, just to push you one or two sentences further, we're talking about new modalities that allow students to own their learning and to be more self-directed?
Yes, and new technologies for learning is not my term. It's coming from the grant project we're working on. But the new technologies of learning from the organization is really rooted in expanding that learner-centered sector, right? So they think about so it's not technology as here's a laptop, go sit in a corner and learn by yourself, right? It's a student-centered perspective, but it's different than what we're currently doing in traditional schools.
Yeah. Okay. That's really exciting work and definitely something people are going to want to follow up on. Julie, I also expect that your inbox is just going to be full after this webinar with people who are excited about your assessment pilot. I know that that's something that every state in the country is watching, and they're hoping that you snag the unicorn and share your hunting strategies. So can you talk a little bit about what's allowed under federal law, what you could do if some of the more significant barriers were removed, and what kind of legislative action Montana could take to further your work?
Yes, so Beth, in Montana, we are innovating in assessment. So we are using a through course assessment. And so driving that change was this critical piece around how do we get an assessment that also gives us instructional utility, right? That was the whole piece. So we started off last year with this pilot, designing these 5 testing windows, these small testlets, and kind of putting it to 2 grade levels. And as we started going through the windows, we're getting folks engaged and going through it. But when we got to like the 3rd, 4th window, we started to see a big drop off with our grade levels because of testing fatigue, because we were beginning the testing of the summative assessment. And so our students were being asked to be, if you will, double testing. And so we went back to the playbook, to the federal playbook, and said, what's in there for flexibility? Because we've got to keep our school districts and our families and our students engaged in this innovation in order to build it, but not at the expense of so much testing away from learning or testing fatigue. And there was a ability to do what they called a testing flexibility waiver. And at that moment in time, it was like the unique, I guess maybe the stars aligned for Montana, because the Innovation Authority Demonstration Act, IADA, was not open at that time. And so we couldn't apply for it. So the testing flexibility was in place back when folks kind of transitioned between assessment systems and No Child Left Behind. So we put together a waiver and said, hey, if we have students participating in this pilot, can they not be double testing and also be taking the end of the year state summative assessment? And guess what? They said yes. And they were great partners and said, absolutely, for 1 year, we're going to give you the ability to not have your students taking both of them as you move through this, with some conditions, of course. And we've been busy making all of those conditions come to life. But as a result of that waiver, it expanded our pilot from being just a few schools and 2 grade levels to all grade levels, 3rd through 8th, math and ELA, to 1/3 of the students in the state of Montana participating in our pilot, so that now we'll be able to go next year full statewide, and be then going in December of 25 for peer review for our summative scores. So these are all now being combined together to collect and make what we call the summative score at the end of the year. But we're working on exciting things like, what's the prototype for the score reports? What are the most useful kinds of score reports that we can give to our teachers and our families that can really help them? And these are in real time, right? And so right now we're able to really kind of structure those assessments aligned to the school scope and sequence of their curriculum, but not currently at that student level. But this is at least one step. So my unicorn, Beth, if I'm hunting for unicorn instead of grizzly bears here in the state of Montana, I'm going to be looking to say, wouldn't it be great, ideally in some world, when a student says, I'm ready to demonstrate that I understand that standard, I'm going to take the test. And if you do, you demonstrate it, you move on, right? And so I think that's going to be really critical as we get this real-time data. It's going to inform us some things in the year when we can still maybe do some things of what we're doing. So I imagine we're going to be going to our legislators and saying, hey, we've got this great tool. It's given us some real-time data. What's it telling us? But now how do we continue to innovate in learning? Not just innovate in assessment, but how do we really then incentivize that innovation in learning and building those personalized pathways and really making this much more from the student agency, if you will, around helping determine their path. So that's a little bit about this wonderful assessment, all kinds of learnings, all kinds of things happening. But I'm just very thankful we are at this state for our educators who are willing to implement a pilot and our students who are participating in it and informing us as we're looking at that item bank and thinking about our our prototype of what kind of score reports would actually be helpful. And we're also super thankful that the Department of Education gave us some flexibility. Without that legislation, I don't think we'd be where we're at. I think we would see less and less wanting to engage in that pilot. So that's kind of what's happening here.
So this is completely unfair to ask you to answer in like 2 minutes. And I acknowledge that. It's on me that I'm going to do it. At the end of the day, after that peer review in 2025, somebody somewhere is going to ask you about those results being used for accountability. And I'm wondering if you've begun to put thought into how those parts can come together.
Beth, yes, I can answer it in 2 seconds. So we have a great partner, a testing vendor. I would have to say, sometimes when you get vendors, to have a vendor who's actually responding to your needs and designing with you, that is something already in the works. We're working towards what it's going to mean, psychometrics, all of those pieces around, are those summative scores reliable and valid? And what I would say is we're going to have an assessment system that almost acts like a formative assessment that's going to meet peer review level.
Wow. Well, okay, so your inbox just got more crowded. Lucy, since we seem to have some time and flexibility, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about what young people think middle school should look like in the future.
So you're working on my memory here. The conference they put together was August of 2022. So it's about a year and a half ago. They put a group of folks together in a room, and they talked about student centered. They talked about having choice. They talked about having real world application of projects and of learning. They were very interested in understanding the hows and the whys of the world and thinking skills, and less about memorizing things that they could easily look up, right? I mean, they are the generation who's carrying a device with them at all times. And it's that shift in thinking about, what our standards are demanding of students in schools, and what they really need to know to be successful. When I think about the time period, of course, AI wasn't as prevalent as it is now, but I'm sure they would lean into AI as a learning tool, right? And they would want to talk about that piece as well. So they're looking at the world as it exists now, where oftentimes our systems are looking at how a world used to exist many years ago and still doing those same things. We have wonderful, powerful, amazing teachers trying to do really innovative, great things within structures and systems that don't allow them to do everything they would like to do at times. And so I think they're often looking at those structures and systems and trying to find ways to have great things happen on their behalf.
And so we're on the cusp. In some individual schools, we're there, but we're on the cusp on a larger scale of being in a world where a middle schooler could say, okay, I see this standard. My expectation in my school community is that I demonstrate mastery or competency of this if I want to move on to the next thing. Here's my menu of choices of how I might be able to do that. Is that the type of thing that we're thinking that technology will enable?
Well, technology can support that as one way of thinking about it. I don't want education ever to be there's one way and only one way. A lot of the reason for the personalization is students have different needs. And so for some students, when I think about my own 2 children, for one child, that's going to work great. Another child, it's going to be, no, I don't like any of those choices. I want to do this thing over here. Right. So they really take into consideration the 2 pieces of the system, right? The content and thinking skills, what they need to walk away with, and who they are and what they bring into that space. And those 2 we have to find a way to put together.
That's fantastic. And it's clear that Montana's work is going to soon be your work if you are successful, which I'm sure you will be. Stephanie, you seem to have the chocolate meets peanut butter end of this with the flexibility guide and the innovation playbook. And I'm wondering what sorts of gleanings you have from people hearing the avenues open to them.
Yeah, so I love that Lucy talked about there's not just one way, and I think that is becoming very evident. Where we find ourselves as a state education agency is we need to build in partnership with schools and districts. We need to bring other external partners to the table to help build the right tools, resources, supports that our schools and districts need. But ultimately, we do still think it's very, very important that our local communities are designing the student-centered approach, the personalized competency-based system that works best for them in their context. And so what we're actually seeing is some districts are starting very small, a school here or a school there before they're ready to go whole district. Others are starting, for example, with high schools and assessments and thinking about credentialing and crediting and looking into their, CTE and workforce, while others are starting with, elementary or middle school. And so I think that we have lots of different approaches happening. And so what we're finding in South Carolina is a lot of exciting models of how. And so to watch those begin to mature and come to fruition is exciting. I think the thing for me that also makes that okay, and I'll just put a plug in for that, is we do have something that we've scaled statewide. So we have the profile of the South Carolina graduate in statute. We know that is what all of our students are supposed to achieve, is the knowledge, which we have our state standards for our content areas in, but also the skills and the characteristics. And so our competencies for the profile of the graduate focus on that 2/3 of the profile, the skills and characteristics that are content agnostic, that kids in pre-K all the way into career can have, that goes through that. It's that through line for their educational journey. And so no matter what course you're engaged in, no matter what the content standards are, the teachers are the content area experts, and they're working with kids in those content areas. The thing that remains consistent for kids, no matter what path they choose, no matter what kind of program they end up pursuing, is those skills and characteristics which transcend any one content area and are transferable for the rest of their life. That's the thing that we're doubling down on. Is we know that our teachers are passionate about their content area, but we also know our teachers are passionate about their students. And so giving them the tools to embed the work of the skills and characteristics in their content has been a real gift. And so our teachers are excited about that work. They feel like it's bringing a lot of meaning to their formative assessment. They're being able to re-examine and rethink the ways in which they approach teaching and learning, but they're still able to rely on the thing they already know and have comfort in, which is their state content standards. And so I think it's a great marriage of those two things. And I think in South Carolina, that has been a real gift to us to have that profile of a graduate. And I think our approach around the skills and characteristics as our foundation is really going to be exciting to watch.
Thank you so much for that. Just a note, because I can see much of what's going on in the chat. As you all prepare for the onslaught to your inboxes, we do have a number of people in the audience who are hungry for specific examples of how some of these policy initiatives are playing out in schools and classrooms. So you might be prepared to mention a few of those to the folks who follow up with you. I think we should move on to the state organization perspectives. We're going to ask the organizational partners who are with us here to respond to what they've heard and to talk about how it fits in with their work. We are joined today by Education Commission of the States, which is a national education policy organization that has been serving educators for nearly 60 years in a nonpartisan, unbiased, and full spectrum manner. John, I'm sorry, I've completely messed up my pieces of paper here. Ben Irwin is going to speak to the Education Commission of the State's reaction to this. For KnowledgeWorks, which is, of course, our chief host organization, a national nonprofit advancing the future of learning in a way that ensures every graduate is ready for what's next, we're going to hear from John Alfuth. And finally, for New Classrooms, which is a nonprofit that advocates for policies that enable schools to meet the unique strengths and needs of each and every student, we're going to hear from Alex Morris. John, why don't we start with you? When you look across states that are looking to implement student-centered learning, what are some common best practices or policies? And what have you heard today that reinforces them?
Thanks, Beth. So that's a great question. And, I think one of the realities is that, again, most areas of state policy impact schools and districts' ability to implement personalized competency-based learning. So we have that exemplifies that 12-part state policy framework for personalized learning. It's big, it's expansive. I think it just really speaks to that reality. But we've also created, I think, which is a bit more descriptive and, condenses it down a bit, a shorter version which we call, it's called Transforming for Tomorrow, and I can share a link in the chat in a bit. But there are 4 kind of pieces, and I think we've heard all of our panelists talk about each of these today. The first one being creating a student-centered vision that really drives everything. This really establishes those skills, qualities, knowledge, dispositions, thinking about even things like social emotional competencies that students need to have upon graduation to be successful. Again, you really heard Stephanie talk about the value that this has provided as a framework for South Carolina. I think the next thing is really incentivizing district innovation. And this isn't just about providing those policy flexibilities. It's about having those structures in place that actually make it easy for schools and districts to leverage those flexibilities when they are actually there. Or in the case of, again, going back to our South Carolina folks, when they don't actually need to leverage any flexibilities, when they can just have that permission to go ahead and do things that they don't have any restrictions in state law around. I think the third thing is really making sure that you can give credit for all learning that occurs, which includes learning that can take place sometimes outside of traditional core courses, but that still may meet those criteria. For example, I was just on a call with a gentleman yesterday from one of our states who was talking about how some of the CTE courses that he's seen over the years may have more science than some of our traditional science courses. Why can't those courses be used to meet a core academic course requirement? And competency-based education really can empower that. And then also thinking about those courses that take place or the learning that takes place outside the walls of the classroom. And I think, again, we really heard Minnesota, Lucy, and then Stephanie in South Carolina talk about the importance of this K-12 education competency-based structures, really preparing students for what comes after graduation. And then the last one, of course, being rethinking assessment accountability policy. I'm not going to try to top what Julie just said for the accountability piece and assessment piece, because I don't think I can say it any better than that. Really just summing it all up by saying that people will respond to what is measured and how that is communicated. And so that being such a large structure that impacts our education systems, that states have a lot of opportunity to both think about what they can do under the existing system, but also potentially think about how they might advocate for changes after experiencing waivers like what Montana's going through that could influence federal law down the road. So I could go on for a lot longer, but I know we want to hear from our other folks, so I'm going to pause there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ben. From you, perhaps you could tell us what policymakers have asked your organization in regards to student-centered learning, and whether you have thoughts about how that's going to bubble up into state legislatures in the coming session.
Yeah, thanks so much, Beth. Just wanted to start with a few things that I heard, because while we work primarily with state policymakers at ECS, in our work, we really realized that policymakers prioritize coalition building and hearing from stakeholders on the ground about the local and state level, working with national partners as well, and trying to meet students where they're at. We know that state leaders can't necessarily regulate or legislate their way to a student-centered system. So a lot of the state policy approaches I'll highlight today are really focused on supporting schools, districts, and communities in developing student-centered systems that fit their own unique contexts. But we do get quite a few questions from policymakers on some of these trending topics, a lot of them having an impact on student-centered learning. And I think a few of them that I'll touch on today are really going to persist into 2024. I think the first big bucket would be states rethinking student learning. So they're having conversations about how they can accelerate learning to make up for interrupted instruction, unfinished learning, and help get students back on track through various supports, whether it's tutoring or other approaches to learning acceleration. We're getting questions around high quality instructional materials. Those are a big part of conversations around literacy and numeracy to ensure that students have access to the materials they need to support their learning as well. We're also getting questions around standards revision and better aligning standards and competencies to some of those instructional materials that students are bringing into the classroom. States are also thinking about graduation requirements and creating more flexibility for students to pursue different learning modalities or different pathways to graduation. States are thinking about awarding credit in different ways and honoring student learning that takes place outside of the classroom or through more experiential approaches as well. And states are also thinking a lot about early post-secondary opportunities to speak to some of the pathways, questions, and points that have come up. Like states are really thinking about how they can better connect education or K-12 education to post-secondary and the workforce. I don't want to trample on what John and Julie have shared. So states are also thinking about measuring school quality and asking about assessment changes they can make. They're rethinking accountability metrics. So especially in the college and career readiness space, to have more holistic measures of readiness. And finally, states are trying to build out more of those student pathways in a really intentional way. So they're wanting to create flexibility for various learning opportunities like career and technical education and work-based learning, for some of those early post-secondary opportunities, and create more alignment to post-secondary credentials and workforce credentials as well. So yeah, really excited to hear from Alex at New Classroom.
Alex, can you perhaps close the loop for us between what you've heard here today about what's possible, what the future could look like, and how you see states using the 2024 legislative process to create the structures to enable more?
Absolutely. Thanks, Beth. And I think this is going to piggyback off what Ben said nicely around one of the themes that ECS is seeing around combating learning loss. So coming out of the pandemic, I think there's just been an overall realization that our model of schooling does not allow for students that are behind to get caught up. And it doesn't even allow for students that are already there to accelerate. And really what we see a lot at New Classrooms is that this has been very pronounced in math. NWA put out some data last summer that showed that the average 8th grader would need over 9 months of schooling to catch up to grade level. And that's an entire extra school year. And so why is this more pronounced in math than it is in other subjects? That's because the nature of math really is cumulative. If students aren't mastering the skills from previous grade levels, they're not going to be successful in mastering and retaining current grade level skills that they're being taught. And so I think that's why certain state legislatures are starting to talk about building these state structures, particularly in math, to make tailored acceleration for students possible. So through these structures, states can incentivize and support schools to focus on the comprehensive learning growth across the grade span, instead of just emphasizing the results of a grade level summative assessment, something that Julie was talking so much about. So what could these statewide structures look like? For example, Virginia last year put out a bill that overwhelmingly passed their state house to establish a math innovation zone pilot. And what math innovation zones really allow for is for students to have personalized math plans in the classroom and then measure student progress across grade levels. And in this session, we're two weeks in to a lot of state legislators starting. We've already seen a bill introduced in Kentucky. It's HB 162, if anyone's interested in learning more, which really requires the Kentucky Department of Education to support schools with math instruction supports and interventions that are student-centered in nature. And so this bill really has a strong emphasis on setting up a multi-tiered system of supports to ensure students, particularly those that are struggling, are proficient in math by both 5th and 8th grade, which is really implying a grade band structure to help students get caught up. So I'm really excited to see where that bill goes in Kentucky and what else is introduced in the upcoming legislative session.
So I think we are closing in on the part where we have some closing remarks, and it's my privilege that the first closing remarks get to be mine. And I'm going to seize my 3 minutes here because I am so excited about what I hear as some key takeaways, which is that we have some states and some organizations that are working on really exciting, promising, and tangible approaches to longstanding things that education needs to improve on. And I see the synergy between them, how they fit together to truly enable student success by making things more personalized and flexible. South Carolina's work, I think, is very exciting on the level that, you know, my inbox has a lot of policy wonks in it and also a lot of educators. And they don't often and always speak the same language. You know, the policymakers want most of the time to enable good things to happen in schools, but don't really understand the practicalities of what might or might not be playing out in the classroom and how that could change. Minnesota, I think, that work is tremendously exciting because the thing that we hear a lot about is student engagement. And it's unclear how lawmakers are understanding the chronic absenteeism and the nexus between how students can plug into school and how that might truly accelerate not just student engagement, but real world preparedness. And finally, Montana, if you guys pull this one off with the through-year assessments, the ticker tape parades in every state capital in the nation will be long and colorful. And that is something that I have heard from people throughout the pandemic is a discussion that they are eager to get back to. And we're so busy putting out other fires that it's on hold in a lot of places, but I guarantee people are going to be watching eagerly and eager to hear what you come up with. And I think to all of you, because I've also been told that I can issue a call of action, I would just simply suggest that you look for opportunities to educate one another, the policy folks and the classroom and school level folks, on this possible synergy and how your work can become more concrete to one another. And I'm so excited that you were all here, and this has been a ton of fun, and I'm going to be plaguing your inboxes myself. And Emily, I think you are going to take us out.
I am, and one more time, I just wanted the opportunity to thank our state panelists, Stephanie, Julie, and Lucy, for taking the time to share their insider knowledge of the great work going on in their states. Our partner organization panelists, John, Ben, and Alex, for sharing their expert thoughts around the future of student-centered learning this legislative session and all the great work their orgs are doing. And of course, the lovely Beth Hawkins for moderating a really, really fantastic discussion today. Lots of fun. If you'd like to follow up with any of our partner organization panelists, you can reach out to them directly using their emails shown on the screen, assuming I remembered how to use technology. You will receive a follow-up email with the webinar recording and some links to resources that you may find useful that we've dropped in the chat today. We also hope that you'll stay in touch and keep the conversation going, right? Like the chat was really full of a lot of great discussion today. Our panelists had a lot of great things to say, and let's make sure it doesn't stop here. So that is all from me. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, panelists, as well as participants, and we will hope to see you soon. Bye.